Hi there, I have just finished Babel-17 by Samuel R. Delaney, and wow, can I just say this book was a complete wow of an amazing book. It exceeded expectations in every way, and my expectations weren't that low. So Samuel R. Delaney, back in the, I'm going to say possibly 80s or 90s, his books were everywhere. Every time you went into an op shop, I think that's charity shop in England or the USA. In Australia, they're opportunity shops and they are for charity. Anyway, any op shop and any second-hand bookshop, you had Delaney everywhere. And I really enjoyed his writing. I read a lot of his books. I probably may have even read Babel-17. I'm not 100% certain. If so, it was a long time ago. But because he was everywhere, you sort of started taking it for granted. So I'd read the book, I'd enjoy the book, then I wouldn't keep it. And a year or two ago, I realised I didn't have any Delaney at all. And none of it left from all that time. So I picked up Babel-17. And I'm so glad that I made this my first Delaney that I have read for a while. It is effervescently wonderful. From the beginning, it hooks you in dozens of different ways and makes you completely and utterly invested. I actually started on my lunch break, and that was a bad move because half an hour with this book when you're first beginning it is not enough. I would recommend starting it when you've got a nice evening ahead of you where you can sit down, maybe you're sipping a port, maybe you're sipping a coffee, and just immerse yourself. So, the beginning of the book, we start with the general, and he's walking through town, and with this amazingly deft touch, Delaney tells us so much about the world through the general. So the general is military, and he feels a bit out of his depth. He's wearing civvies. We gather he's wearing a nice cut suit, and he's on the way to the bar to meet someone, but he's not been to this bar before. One gets the impression that the military, he's high enough in the military that people he wants normally comes to him, but not this person. And as he walks down the street, just looking around, looking at normal people living their normal lives and contemplating them, we learn that this world is a future universe in which many planets have been settled. There's a war, and there have been multiple invasions by the invaders. The Alliance? No, the Alliance are us. The invaders are the other guys. Whatever. Anyway. Multiple invasions that brought people into bestiality and dystopian levels of survival. Riots, horrors. And this is helped form the society as it is today. But this is no post-apocalyptic society. This is a civilized society. And the contemplation of humanity and what it's gone through is a great introduction. Now, once the general makes it to the bar, we see through his eyes his first sight of this famous celebrity poet. This is Ryder Wong, who is our main protagonist throughout the book, though the general reappears at one stage. I'm not going to tell you anything about this encounter because the whole encounter is effervescent in the beauty of its writing and the characterization and the whole event, and it's like a three-dimensional event that you are circling and looking within it. And the writing, spectacular. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I can't do justice to it. You need to read this for yourself. So we find out this encounter has happened because Ryder used to be in the employ of the military in cryptography, and recently a code has been found called Babel-17. Radio recordings have been taken or found around various events that were initially thought to be accidents but now suspected to be sabotage. No one in the military cryptography department could make anything of this code, but a number of people higher up told the general that he needed to see Ryder Wong. Now, as she's a civilian, he can't order her, and she's got her own very strong opinions about how this is going to work. She early on identifies Babel-17 as a language rather than as a code. She says she needs all this extra information about it. She needs the actual recordings rather than the cryptography's version. Sorry. rather than the military's version of the recordings. And the next thing she does is she goes to see her psychologist, and we find out much more about Ryder Wong. Ryder? I guess you'd say it Ryder. I've been saying it in my head. She is a great character, by the way. So skipping ahead past the next thing that I was going to describe, the characterization here is amazing because this was written in the 70s. Actually, no, it won an award in 67, I think. So this is a 60s book in which a science fiction writer who was male made the main protagonist female, of Asian descent, and what we today would call neurodivergent. Now, if you want to seek out early writings that had characters that tick all these boxes, then this is the book for you. In this book, she's called autistic. She doesn't conform to autism as you would probably describe it today. But the fact that she's described as neurodivergent and that her neurodivergency allows for this amazing patterning that she can do, which is why she was a wizard at cryptography and why she went on to be a celebrity poet, because patterns are the things that she does best. She also does huge numbers of languages. She's got a whole heap of alliance languages she speaks, and she speaks other ones, and she knows computer languages as well. So basically, you could say that coding and languages are the center of the science in this early SFF. Now, having had a look at the locations in which Babel-17 has been recorded by the military, Ryder Wong decides that she needs to go to a certain location in space, which is how we end up with this marvelous space romp. You could call it space opera if it was written today, but it wasn't, so it's science fiction. I'm maintaining that this is science fiction of the best type. In order to do that, Ryder Wong is actually a captain in her own right, and she can gather a crew, and the military have given her pretty much an open checkbook to do this. The way in which she invokes her captaincy and puts together ship's crew is early on in the book, and it is absolutely fascinating. It takes us into the depths of a society that is never over-described as a more modern book would be, but is completely and utterly, I'm going to say, cyberpunk. It is multifaceted, it is amazing, it's really, really weird and quite wonderful. So the ship crew she puts together is like nothing, no other ship crew that I've read in this type of science fiction before. I think it's the type of ship crew that many modern writers are trying to describe, but I don't think any of them that I've read so far have done it half as well as Delaney did. So first of all, it includes 3 discorporate people, which basically means they're dead, and they come on board not as people at all, but as personalities, characters, ether. Most people can't communicate with them except with special instrumentation, but Ryder Wong can. She interprets what they say to her through the language of Basque, which is interesting. Delaney must have had a true fascination with languages, and that comes across. So the 3 discorporate ones actually become the eyes, ears, and nose of the ship, so that sensory array, and that can't be done by live people because too much information, it would kill them, send them insane or something. But once you're dead, you don't have to worry about being insane. Yay. And these 3 characters are a small but consistent part of the whole story because, of course, they can't be seen or perceived by normal people. Only by special instrumentation one gathers. For the rest of the crew, you've got this whole gang of really small children who are run by a handler, and they do most of the tasks on board. It's a fascinating notion, and I enjoyed it. It's very not modern. It's hard to imagine someone getting away with having small children doing this type of task or this type of setup, but it's interesting. Written with a very light touch. You don't ever find out more about it than you want to know, and you're left constantly wanting to know a little bit more, which I like in a book personally. And oh yes, and this future world has got a very open-minded attitude towards death. Aside from the sensory array of her ship, the eyes, ears, nose, which it is corporate, in order to get her crew together, she needs a navigator, and navigators apparently come in threes, and they're a bonded relationship triptology? What do they call it? Triptych. They don't call it. I can't remember what they call it. Duo? Not. Of course not. Duo's two. Three of them. Anyway. And in order to find them, she collects someone who's basically an admin guy and can sign off on her putting this crew together. He has to be there to collect their identifications, one assumes. But mostly he's there to be a sort of semi-unknowing conductor, because he's never been into these levels of society. There's a very strong level between command, I think, and transport, I think they call it, or communication and transport. So she takes him off to this club-like place in which captains who are incredibly modified creatures compete with each other in a sphere. She hires a captain who's basically described as being so heavily body modified that he looks more like a griffin or possibly a dragon. And yeah, I won't go into that too much either. And she hires her navigation team. The captain that she hires and his second and third navigators had been on a previous ship. Bad things had happened to that ship, and they'd lost one of their navigators. She died. And so you've got these two morning navigators that really need to be part of a three to work for navigation, or indeed as human beings. So they're grieving. In order to find the perfect complement to their navigator trilogy, Ryder goes to the morgue. And we find out that in this future, when you want to die, you go to the morgue, you die, but you can be resurrected anytime. And that's what she does with the character that she, through her patterning ability, sees will be the perfect complement to Kelly and Ron, the two navigators she already has. This particular navigator that she resurrects is from what is now called Pan-Africa, and she speaks Swahili, or is it Niswahili? I don't know much about that language, but that made an interesting dynamic too, because they're incorporating someone who doesn't actually speak any English, though she speaks navigator, which is apparently a whole different thing. All of this, there's so much packed into this tiny little book, and far from being a fast read, 158 pages took me days, because there's so much and it's so enjoyable. You simultaneously struck by wanting it to last forever and wanting to gulp it down because you want more. It's just great. Now, so many books from this era need to be read through the lens of the milieu, and I would argue that this is not one of them. I think this reads remarkably contemporary in many, many ways that you don't expect necessarily from a book written in the 60s and 70s. When it comes to human attitudes and relationships and the insightful level of a male writing a female as a protagonist, all of these things come through in what I feel is a very, very contemporary way. Oh, by the way, I've got this nice little orbit. It's not as beautiful as some of the early edition covers, but it's still quite nice, in good condition if you like that sort of thing. Right, so Ryder Wong, Captain Wong, is a poet, crazy abilities with patterns, that all those languages that I mentioned before that she speaks. And there's all these references to languages and coding and how we use language to manifest reality and how our personal reality manifests in our language. This is a constant dynamic throughout the book. And honestly, if there's a science in here, it's probably the science of linguistics that is the strongest. For example, at the beginning of part 3, Ryder is coming out of unconsciousness and she's drifting in this semi-unconscious sea of definitions of languages, and she's ruminating about all these languages. I really enjoyed it. I particularly like the bit where she mentions that Finnish has 16 cases to the noun and there's other languages that have none. I found Finnish, or Sumoi, fascinating language when I visited Finland, so I like that. Okay, science, languages, linguistics and patterns, but the society. This is the cyberpunk society that William Gibson later made so famous. Body modifications are almost the norm. No one expects to see people look like what we'd see people today. They've got, one has a rose growing out of his shoulder, another one gets a dragon implanted in the other one while we're watching. They have scales, they have feathers. They're so heavily modified that they wouldn't be recognizable as human in today's society. And sometimes that's done intentionally, as in the case of the captains, who need a much faster reaction time. Not the captains, not the navigators. Ship crew, whatever, I can't remember which one, okay? So sue me. And sometimes it's intentional for the role that they play, but it's just for ornamentation, or what the cyberpunk role-playing game used to call style over substance, and you get extra points for style over substance. Here you've got style over substance as well as style as substance, and everything in between. So we follow Ryder Wong as she goes looking for the source of Babel-17, in a particular part of the universe. It lies between where the Alliance and where the invaders come from, we sort of gather. But she has a series of adventures and encounters along the way that aren't at all what you would expect from the beginning of the book, and aren't at all what the beginning of the book tells you they're going to be. And I'm not going to go into them too heavily, because I think anyone who likes classic science fiction should find and read this book. It is so good. It is amazingly good. Amazingly better than I expected and remembered, and I'm never letting go of it again. At one point she goes to these shipyards where they're creating new weapons, and it starts off feeling like this interesting little encounter, and there's a sabotage that happens there as well, taking them on to the next part of the plot. But the descriptions of the weapons and the way they're developing humans as weapons and other bioweapons is fascinating, chilling, and again done with a very light touch. There's a lot there that is truly fascinating. Along the way, Captain Wong finds that she's got somewhere on board a spy or a traitor, and they discover that when their ship is, I guess, fooled into jumping into the middle of the Nova. At the last moment, before they are consumed by the Nova, they are hooked out of it by a fleet of pirates that no one really knew existed, but they've got an unofficial awareness with the Alliance. The Alliance are aware that they take down the invaders, so they don't follow them too heavily. And we're treated to this whole new society, this amazing ship wafting through an area where communications are heavily jammed, and there's a couple of battles. If you like space battles, if you enjoyed the description of space battles in Ender's Game, then I really think you're missing out if you haven't seen the space battle between the pirates and the invaders. The description of the net that the invaders are creating as a defense is fascinating, and I think was possibly the visual notion was borrowed from when they did the movie of Ender's Game, but also I felt a lot of feels similar to Star Wars, so maybe Star Wars and Babel-17 weren't too far away from each other in concept in a few places. So yeah, great battle, which I'm not going to describe any further. Great main character that everyone should read, and a truly beautifully written book. It's like, have I mentioned that this was an amazing book? Maybe I haven't. But I haven't mentioned it enough, because the writing is beautiful in its own right. The story is so exciting that everyone should go off and read it. And thank you for listening to me rave about how marvelous this book is. Seriously, I don't normally do best picks of the year, but maybe I will for YouTube, BookTube, whatever. And if so, this will be probably in the top 5. I've read some marvelous books this year, but this really stood out from the second I picked it up and started reading. Thank you very much. If you are fond of Samuel R. Delaney and have read many of his books, do by all means tell me which one you think I should read next. I bought a whole heap of his. They're sitting there on the to-read shelf. I might need a placemaker, something else in between, but amazing book. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, all the algorithm things if you want to. And if you don't, just go away and read good books.